In the early days of the P-47 Thunderbolt's appearance over Europe, German pilots could hardly contain their laughter. To their eyes, this machine was not a sleek predator like their Messerschmitt P-47 Thunderbolt or the formidable Focke-Wulf F-90. It was a brute, oversized, heavy, and awkward. Nazi propaganda quickly seized on these impressions, branding the Thunderbolt as a ridiculous flying milk jug, an aircraft too bloated to fight and too sluggish to survive. Luftwaffe flyers boasted that they would swat these clumsy intruders from the skies as easily as a farmer chasing away a barnyard pest. From briefing rooms to mess halls, the arrogance ran high. German officers pointed to the Thunderbolt's bulky fuselage and massive radial engine as proof that America had misunderstood air combat. In their view, speed and agility ruled the skies, and the jug seemed to possess neither. Pamphlets and speeches reinforced this narrative, promising pilots that the enemy's machines were inferior, overbuilt toys of a decadent nation with no grasp of true warcraft. Among the Luftwaffe's seasoned aces, confidence was absolute. They had triumphed in France, swept through the Balkans, and battled over Russia. Against that backdrop, this lumbering new fighter looked laughable. The jug's thick wings and broad frame were mocked as signs of weakness, as if America had built a flying tank instead of a fighter. Each sneer, each dismissive comment only deepened their conviction that German engineering would dominate once again. Yet beneath the laughter was a seed of underestimation that would soon grow into bitter regret. What the Luftwaffe dismissed as a joke carried hidden strengths that would, in time, rewrite the balance of power in the skies over Europe. The ridicule, so loud at first, would be drowned out by the roar of 850 caliber guns. When the Luftwaffe first measured the P-47 Thunderbolt against its own fighters, the comparison only seemed to confirm their scorn. German pilots had long trusted the Messerschmitt P-47, a machine that had carved its legend in the skies of Spain, France, and the Eastern Front. Sleek, compact, and agile, it embodied the German philosophy of aerial warfare, speed above all else. Alongside it stood the Focke-Wulf F-90, a newer, heavier design, but one that carried a reputation for devastating firepower and sharp maneuverability. To those who flew them, these aircraft represented the pinnacle of fighter engineering. Against such proven predators, the American jug appeared almost absurd. In mock briefings, Luftwaffe officers compared its size to a bomber rather than a fighter, joking that its broad wings could provide shade for entire squadrons. Pilots scoffed at its weight, claiming no machine so large could ever compete in a turning battle. To them, the Thunderbolt was simply too fat to fight, and they spoke with open confidence about how quickly it would be outflown and destroyed. This confidence was not just bravado, it was rooted in years of early victory. The Luftwaffe had dominated skies over Poland, France, and the Balkans with relative ease, often facing inferior or outdated opposition. Even on the Eastern Front, where Soviet numbers were daunting, German technology gave them an edge. Against that history, the P-47 looked like another inferior opponent, one more machine to prove German superiority. But as history would show, the laughter was premature. The jug's real test had not yet begun, and the German pilot's smug certainty would not last long. The arrival of the P-47 Thunderbolt marked a new direction in American fighter design. Where most fighters pursued slender frames and light agility, the Thunderbolt was unapologetically massive. At its heart was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a powerful 18-cylinder radial engine that could haul the jug through the skies at remarkable speed, despite its bulk. With its oversized frame and thick armor plating, the P-47 looked more like a flying fortress than a nimble duelist. Yet its most distinctive feature, and one that would define its reputation, was its armament. Strapped into those wide wings were 850 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 on each side. In an era when many fighters carried 2 or 4 guns, the Thunderbolt doubled that firepower, delivering a storm of lead that could shred aircraft, convoys, and even armored vehicles on the ground. A single burst from its guns poured hundreds of rounds into the air, saturating targets with devastating effect. The design philosophy was clear: survivability and overwhelming firepower over elegance. The cockpit was heavily armored, the fuel tanks self-sealing, and the frame built to take punishment that would tear apart lighter aircraft. On the ground, mechanics admired its ruggedness. In the air, Pilots quickly realized it was not the fragile milk jug their enemies claimed, but a heavyweight brawler that could absorb hits and keep fighting. At first glance, the Thunderbolt seemed like an oddity, but as it rolled onto airfields in Europe, it brought with it a new kind of confidence. America had built a fighter not to dance with opponents, but to outlast them, and to deliver a strike so fierce that few enemies could recover. Despite its imposing design, the Thunderbolt did not immediately inspire confidence among its own pilots. Many young flyers in the USAAF had trained on lighter aircraft and were used to the idea that fighters should be nimble and graceful. When they first saw the Jug looming on the runway, its bulk seemed comical. Nicknames like Jug and Flying Batpub circulated not out of affection but skepticism. Could something so large ever survive against the Luftwaffe's sleek machine? Early training flights did little to ease those doubts. The Thunderbolt was heavy on the controls, sluggish in a turn, and not particularly graceful at low altitudes. Some pilots worried they would be outmaneuvered and left helpless in dogfight. In briefings, commanders emphasized the Thunderbolt's strengths: diving speed, altitude performance, and ruggedness, but it was difficult to shake first impressions. The doubts deepened during the aircraft's first missions over Europe. Pilots complained about the challenges of climbing to high altitude to escort bombers, and there were stories of frustration when German fighters seemed to outturn them with ease. For a moment it appeared the skeptics might be right, but as hours in the cockpit grew, a different picture began to emerge. Pilots discovered that while the Jug was no ballerina, it was an unstoppable prizefighter. It could dive faster than almost anything in the sky, giving pilots a reliable escape or a devastating attack angle. And when its 8 Brownings roared together, the wall of lead was unlike anything German pilots had faced. Slowly the doubts turned to respect. The pilots who once mocked their own machine began to realize they were flying something extraordinary. When the P-47 Thunderbolt first entered combat over Europe in 1943, it faced a trial by fire. Its job was as daunting as it was critical, escorting massive formations of American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators deep into enemy territory. The Jug's heavy frame and massive engine were built for high-altitude combat, but the reality of those first missions revealed both the machine's strengths and its flaws. Climbing to 25,000 feet was no easy feat. The Thunderbolt's weight made the ascent long and arduous, and pilots often grumbled about how slowly the altimeter crept upward compared to the nimble German fighters they knew awaited them. Luftwaffe pilots, used to the crisp climb of their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, saw the lumbering approach of Thunderbolts as confirmation of their earlier mockery. From above they swooped down with confidence, convinced the big American fighters would be easy prey. But while the climb tested patience, the Jug revealed something unexpected once it reached altitude. Its powerful turbo supercharger came alive in the thin air, feeding the double Wasp engine with relentless efficiency. Where many fighters lost their edge at extreme heights, the Thunderbolt remained steady, fast, and menacing. Pilots who had cursed its climb began to appreciate its stability when cruising alongside the bombers, able to meet German attacks head-on without faltering. Still, the first clashes were brutal. German fighters darted in with the precision of hawks, exploiting every sluggish turn of the Thunderbolt. Losses stung, and pilots had to quickly learn that their new aircraft was not built for tight duel. Instead, it was a machine of altitude, speed, and devastating firepower. The lesson would be costly, but once learned it would forever change how the Jug was flown. The early frustrations of Thunderbolt squadrons did not go unnoticed. Engineers and tacticians quickly set about addressing the weaknesses that pilots complained about. One of the first improvements came in the form of refined engine tuning and adjustments to the turbo supercharger, which gave the Jug sharper responsiveness at high altitude. Gradual updates to propeller design also helped the fighter climb faster, cutting down the long, vulnerable ascent that had plagued early missions. But the real turning point came not from mechanical changes alone but from tact. Pilots began to abandon the instinct to dogfight like their German opponents. Instead, they learned to exploit the Thunderbolt's true strengths: speed in a dive, rugged durability, and sheer firepower. New doctrines emphasized boom and zoom tactics, where Jug pilots attacked from altitude, unleashed their 850 caliber guns in a blistering pass, and then used their superior dive speed to escape before the enemy could react. These adjustments paid dividends. German pilots who had once laughed at the Jug's bulk were shocked to see it screaming out of the sun at terrifying speeds, spitting hundreds of rounds in seconds, and then vanishing in a dive they could not match without risking structural failure. The same mass that made the Thunderbolt look clumsy now became a weapon, giving it momentum and stability that turned every dive into a hammer blow. Within months, the reputation of the flying milk jug was shifting. What had begun as a liability was rapidly becoming a nightmare for the Luftwaffe, one that could no longer be dismissed with arrogance. The true character of the P-47 Thunderbolt revealed itself not in twisting duels but in the thunderous roar of its guns during strafing runs. Once American pilots began to master their machine, they realized its immense firepower could devastate anything caught beneath its wings. With 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns mounted 4 to a side, the Jug delivered a storm of lead so thick it was often described as a flying buzzsaw. When pilots lined up on trains, convoys or troop columns, the effect was immediate and shocking. A single burst shredded railcars, flipped trucks into fiery wreckage, and tore through defenses with merciless efficiency. German soldiers who once scoffed at the Jug's bulky silhouette now learned to fear the sight of it diving at them, guns blazing. Survivors described the experience as overwhelming, a curtain of bullets that seemed impossible to escape. The strafing missions also revealed the Thunderbolt's resilience. While other fighters might falter under flak, the Jug's armor and rugged airframe absorbed punishment that would have crippled lighter machines. Pilots returned from sorties with wings peppered by shrapnel, engines leaking or control surfaces damaged, and yet the Jug often made it home. This toughness gave airmen confidence to press attacks at low altitude, where danger was greatest but impact was undeniable. The Luftwaffe, once quick to mock, began to take the Jug seriously. It was not elegant, but it was terrifying. Its 8 guns redefined what a fighter could do, turning it into a tool of destruction that reached far beyond the skies. The milk jug had become a juggernaut. For the Luftwaffe, the first real encounters with the P-47's guns were both humiliating and terrifying. German pilots who had once laughed at the so-called flying milk jugs suddenly found themselves facing an opponent that could shred the battlefield below with casual brutality. Reports began to filter back from the front. Armored columns torn apart in minutes, trains reduced to twisted metal, and supply depots blasted into infernos. The scale of destruction shocked even seasoned Luftwaffe veterans. In briefings they had been told the Thunderbolt was slow, clumsy and unfit for combat. Yet here it was, diving at impossible speeds and unleashing a torrent of .50 caliber firepower that nothing in its path could withstand. Ground crews who inspected the wreckage of convoys spoke in disbelief about how little remained after a P-47 strike. Trucks split open, fuel drums ignited, and men left with no chance to fight back. In the skies, German pilots were equally unsettled. Even when they attempted to challenge the Jug, they discovered its mass and firepower turned head-on passes into suicidal gambles. The sheer density of lead pouring from those 8 guns made frontal attacks nearly unthinkable. More than one Luftwaffe veteran later admitted that seeing the Jug's wings flare with fire was the moment they realized America's industrial machine had created a weapon unlike any other. The laughter had stopped. The milk jug had transformed into an executioner, capable of dismantling not only German logistics but also their morale. What had once been dismissed as a clumsy giant was now feared as a relentless predator, raining lead with a fury the Luftwaffe had no answer for. If the P-47 Thunderbolt's firepower inspired fear, its toughness cemented its legend. Pilots quickly learned that the Jug could take punishment that would have destroyed almost any other fighter in the sky. Time and again stories emerged of Thunderbolts returning home riddled with holes, engines coughing, controls barely responsive, and yet still managing to limp back to base. The aircraft's sheer bulk, once mocked, became its greatest asset. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine was shielded by a thick round fuselage that absorbed punishment like armor. German fire, whether from 20mm cannons or flak batteries, often tore through wings and fuselage, but the Jug's redundant systems and raw structural strength kept it airborne. Photographs from the war show Thunderbolts patched with hundreds of bullet holes, tails shredded, and engines scorched, yet with grinning pilots standing beside them. One famous account tells of a Jug that lost an entire cylinder bank to enemy fire, yet still flew nearly 200 miles back to base. Another described a Thunderbolt whose hydraulics had been shot out, forcing the pilot to belly land, but the aircraft still delivered him safely. Such tales spread quickly among both American and German airmen. For the USAAF, they gave pilots confidence that their machine would give them a fighting chance even on the worst day. For the Luftwaffe, they were a source of dread. No matter how much fire they poured into the jug, it refused to fall. This durability meant Thunderbolt pilots attacked with boldness, knowing they could dive through walls of flak or go head-to-head with German defenses and still stand a chance of survival. The jug wasn't just an aircraft, it was a fortress with wings. Stories of the Thunderbolt's durability quickly became campfire legends in every squadron. Pilots spoke in awe of comrades who returned with their aircraft looking more like flying wrecks than machines of war. One aviator recalled landing with an entire section of his wing missing, yet the jug held steady enough to bring him down alive. Another told of limping home with his cockpit canopy shattered, instruments ruined and smoke trailing behind, but the big fighter refused to quit. These anecdotes weren't just tales, they boosted morale. Knowing that the jug could soak up hits and still fly gave pilots the courage to press attacks more aggressively. Missions that seemed suicidal in lighter aircraft felt survivable in the Thunderbolt. Pilots often said they trusted the jug like a faithful companion, one that would never abandon them, no matter how fierce the fight became. The Luftwaffe too began to notice. German pilots reported frustration after unloading everything they had into a jug only to watch it claw back to altitude or dive safely away. It was demoralizing to face an opponent that seemed almost indestructible. Where once they laughed at the flying milk jug, they now respected and feared it as a relentless adversary. For American crews, the Thunderbolt's toughness became a symbol of endurance, proof that victory wasn't just about agility or glamour in the sky. It was about survival, firepower and determination, all embodied in the jug that kept flying when logic said it should have fallen. By mid-war, the tone among German pilots had shifted from mockery to unease. The very traits they had laughed at, the jug's weight, its bulky frame, its supposed sluggishness, were proving deadly when the Thunderbolt was used to its strengths. Nothing in the Luftwaffe's arsenal could match its performance in a dive. Once a P-47 rolled over into a steep descent, it accelerated with crushing momentum, easily outrunning Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs that dared to follow. German pilots who tried to chase discovered that their own aircraft shook and strained near their limits, while the jug seemed to grow steadier the faster it fell. And then came the firepower. When those 8 Browning .50 caliber guns opened up, they blanketed the sky with streams of tracers and raw destruction. German pilots who had once dismissed the jug as little more than a bomber escort began to fear frontal passes and diving ambushes. Few dared to challenge head-on attacks, knowing the wall of lead could tear apart even the sturdiest fighter in a heartbeat. Ground units too felt the shift. Soldiers who had grown accustomed to swatting away lighter Allied aircraft now watched the jug carve apart convoys and gun positions with merciless efficiency. Its ability to dive fast, strike hard and absorb punishment created a new respect and annoying fear among those who faced it. For the Luftwaffe, the laughter was over. The milk jug had become a predator, and the realization was spreading quickly. The P-47 was not a clumsy curiosity but a weapon of overwhelming power. As the war ground on, the Luftwaffe could no longer ignore the harsh comparisons between their aircraft and the jug. The Messerschmitt Bth 109 remained agile at high altitudes but lacked the rugged construction to survive prolonged fights with Thunderbolt. A few well-placed hits from the jug's 850s could shred its lighter frame, forcing German pilots into evasive maneuvers instead of pressing attacks. The Focke-Wulf Bth 190, once hailed as a formidable opponent, also revealed its limits when stacked against the Thunderbolt. While the 90 could match the jug in speed at certain altitudes, it could not withstand the punishment of a direct firefight. German pilots grew wary of engaging Thunderbolts head-on, knowing the volume of firepower would simply overwhelm them. Even in diving escapes, once their trump card, the Luftwaffe found the jug nearly untouchable. Its sheer weight turned dives into lethal pursuits that few German planes could outrun. In tactical terms, this forced German pilots into a defensive posture. Instead of dictating the fight, they reacted, avoided or disengaged altogether. Escort missions that once seemed vulnerable became harder to crack as formations of Thunderbolts held the line with sheer firepower and durability. The Luftwaffe's once vaunted dominance of the skies was slipping away, and the jug played a central role in that transformation. For German pilots, this was a bitter pill. The aircraft they had ridiculed as a flying milk jug had systematically exposed their weaknesses in durability, in firepower, and in endurance. The comparison stung, but more than that, They marked the collapse of confidence. Facing the Jug was no longer a contest of equals, it was a struggle for survival. The true test of the Thunderbolt's worth came not in isolated dogfights, but in the grinding campaigns to protect America's heavy bombers over Europe. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator carried the promise of crippling Germany's industrial heart, but without protection, they were vulnerable to swarms of Luftwaffe interceptors. Early raids had cost dozens of bombers in a single day, crews cut down before they reached their targets. Into this brutal air war stepped the P-47 Thunderbolt. At first, many doubted whether the Jug could perform as an escort. Its size and fuel consumption limited its range, and critics feared it would arrive too late or leave too soon. But when the Thunderbolts took their place alongside the bomber formations, skepticism vanished. With their massive frames and unmatched firepower, they carved corridors of safety through the sky. Luftwaffe pilots who had once charged bomber groups with confidence now found themselves wading into storms of tracers. The Jug's presence alone was often enough to dissuade attacks. When German fighters pressed in, Thunderbolt pilots fought with ferocity, slashing through the enemy ranks with brutal gunnery passes. The 850 caliber guns could rip a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf to pieces in seconds, and the Jug's toughness allowed it to shrug off counterattacks that might have downed lighter escorts. Pilots learned to dive from high cover positions, intercepting attackers before they could even line up on the bomber. To the bomber crews, the Jug was more than an escort, it was a guardian angel. Seeing its hulking silhouette alongside their formation gave them courage, a reminder that they weren't alone in the hostile sky. To the Luftwaffe, it was a nightmare, an aircraft too tough to scare off, too powerful to ignore, and too relentless to escape. For the Luftwaffe, the arrival of Thunderbolts alongside the bomber streams was a crushing shift in the air war. Their traditional tactic, the aggressive head-on attack, had once reaped devastating results against unescorted B-17s and B-24s. A tight formation of German fighters could slice through the bomber boxes, raking them with cannon fire before breaking away. But with P-47s in the mix, those frontal assaults turned into near-suicidal gambles. Thunderbolt pilots anticipated the moves. Stationed high above the bombers, they swooped down with brutal precision the moment German formations lined up. The Luftwaffe found themselves under attack before they could even squeeze their triggers. And even when they broke through, the 850s from the Jugs tore into their aircraft with such density of fire that few could press home a strike without suffering crippling damage. Reports from German pilots spoke of mounting frustration. Some described feeling as though the bomber streams were now wrapped in steel walls, the Thunderbolts acting as battering rams against their every attempt. The confidence that once fueled their head-on tactics dissolved into caution. Engagements became shorter, less decisive, and far costlier. Every attempt ended with more aircraft lost, more comrades failing to return. For the Luftwaffe, it was the bitter confirmation of a truth they had long resisted. The balance of power in the skies had shifted. What had once been open hunting grounds had become killing fields, but now it was German pilots who were the prey. By the time the Thunderbolt's reputation as a bomber escort was secured, its role on the front lines had become just as feared. The Jug's heavy frame, powerful engine, and devastating 850 caliber guns made it a natural predator against German ground forces. When tasked with ground attack missions, it transformed into a flying executioner, tearing through supply convoys, rail lines, and armored columns with ruthless efficiency. Low over the countryside, the P-47s unleashed streams of fire that shredded trucks and troop carriers in seconds. Tanks, once symbols of German battlefield dominance, found themselves helpless against repeated strafing runs. While a single pass might not always pierce heavy armor, concentrated fire into softer components, tracks, fuel tanks, or exposed infantry, rendered even the most formidable panzers useless. The roar of diving Thunderbolts and the hail of bullets raining down became a sound German soldiers learned to dread. Railroads, the arteries of German logistics, fared no better. Jug pilots targeted locomotives and bridges, leaving smoldering wreckage that crippled transport lines. Supply shortages deepened. Frontline units starved of fuel and ammunition as the relentless ground attack sorties ground away their mobility. For men on the ground, it felt as if the sky itself had turned against them. To the Allies, the Thunderbolt became indispensable. Infantry advancing across France or fighting through Italy knew the Jug was overhead, ready to break German resistance with firepower from above. What began as a plane mocked for its bulk had become one of the most terrifying sights on the battlefield, a hulking Avenger whose thunderous guns spelled doom for anything caught in its path. The Thunderbolt's ferocity was not only witnessed in Western Europe, but also echoed across the Eastern Front through the stories of Lend-Lease deliveries. While the Soviets received relatively few P-47s compared to other aircraft, those that did arrive left a strong impression on Red Army pilots and ground crews. Built like a tank and armed with unmatched firepower, the Jug quickly earned respect as a rugged ally in the struggle against Nazi Germany. Soviet pilots accustomed to lighter, more agile aircraft like the Yak-9 or La-5 were astonished at the Thunderbolt's size and resilience. Reports described how the P-47 could absorb punishment that would have doomed other planes, limping back to base with gaping holes in its wings or tail. In an environment where survival often came down to a single burst of enemy fire, the Jug's ability to withstand punishment was regarded almost as a miracle. On the ground, Soviet soldiers marveled at its devastating strafing ability. Convoys and entrenched positions that once seemed safe from air attack were shredded under the concentrated fire of the eight. The aircraft's dive speed and stability allowed Soviet pilots to smash German supply lines with precision, reinforcing its reputation as one of the Allies' most effective strike aircraft. Though Soviet doctrine placed greater emphasis on their own designs, stories of the American giant spread quickly among units. The Jug became a symbol of the industrial might of the United States, proof that even in the skies over Russia, America's factories reached deep into the war. For the Germans, it was yet another reminder that their enemies' resources and machines stretched far beyond what they could ever hope to match. By 1944, the impact of the P-47 Thunderbolt could be measured not only in anecdotes or battlefield impressions, but in cold, devastating numbers. Luftwaffe squadrons that had once ruled the skies now faced relentless attrition at the hands of Allied fighters, with the Jug playing a leading role in that transformation. The Thunderbolt's kill statistics told a story of systematic dismantling. Its .50 caliber guns, coupled with the ruggedness to survive deep escort missions, translated into staggering air-to-air victories. Thousands of German aircraft, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even the occasional jet fell to its gun. By the war's end, Thunderbolt pilots had claimed more than 20,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground, a figure that shocked German officers reviewing post-war assessments. But the true devastation came through attrition. Luftwaffe tactics depended on aggressive, massed attacks against bomber streams. Each failed attempt meant the loss of yet another veteran pilot, irreplaceable in the face of dwindling training pipelines. The Thunderbolt's presence ensured those attacks grew more and more costly. For every Allied bomber lost, the Germans often paid in multiples, their aircraft shredded and their aces overwhelmed. The effects rippled beyond the air battles themselves. German industry, already straining under constant bombing, now had to cope with the hemorrhaging of aircraft and pilots. Factories that managed to turn out replacements could not match the sheer output of American assembly lines, and the Luftwaffe's combat strength steadily declined. Once the pride of the Reich, the Air Force became a shadow of itself, hounded day and night by machines the propaganda had once dismissed as clumsy jokes. The laughter had long since faded, replaced by grim awareness. The P-47 was not just another fighter, it was one of the hammers breaking the Luftwaffe's back blow by blow until for many German pilots, the shift in perception of the P-47 was deeply personal. What had begun as laughter at the flying milk jug soon turned into quiet dread each time the hulking silhouette appeared in the sky. Testimonies collected after the war reveal just how quickly the mockery gave way to fear. One Luftwaffe ace recalled his first encounter with a Thunderbolt in a dive. He believed his Messerschmitt could simply pull away until the Jug followed, gaining speed with terrifying stability. It was like being chased by a falling mountain, he admitted, confessing that he barely escaped with his life. Another pilot described the horror of seeing his comrade's Focke-Wulf disintegrated in seconds under the concentrated fire of those eight. It looked as if the air itself had turned solid against him, he said. For younger recruits, The Jug represented hopeless odds. Veteran mentors who had once promised easy victories were now falling one by one, cut down by aircraft they had ridiculed only months before. The cockpit banter turned grim, jokes replaced by muttered prayers when bomber escort missions were announced. Some Luftwaffe units even nicknamed the P-47 the Butcher Bird's Executioner, a dark reversal of the pride once attached to their own fight. By 1944, the fear was no longer hidden. German pilots openly admitted that facing the Thunderbolt was among the most dangerous assignments in the sky. The laughter that had once greeted its bulk was gone. What remained was respect and a gnawing certainty that the war could not be won against machines like skies over Europe belonged to the Allies. In the quiet years after the war, the Thunderbolt's reputation underwent a transformation as striking as its wartime performance. What had once been derided as an ungainly milk jug became a case study in why appearances in warfare can be so deceiving. Engineers, historians, and former pilots alike pointed to the P-47 as proof that effectiveness could not always be measured in elegance or sleekness. Its bulk, once the target of laughter, had hidden its greatest strengths: resilience, firepower, and adaptability. For German veterans reflecting on their experiences, the Jug became a symbol of underestimation. They admitted that their arrogance had blinded them to what the United States was truly capable of producing. Where the Luftwaffe had relied on finely tuned, lightweight machines, America had embraced an aircraft designed for punishment and versatility. The result was an airplane that might not have dazzled in appearances but devastated in combat. American pilots who flew the Jug echoed this sentiment. Many admitted that when they first climbed into the cockpit, they doubted the ungainly fighter. Yet by war's end, thousands of them swore by its rugged dependability, crediting it with saving their lives time and again. The P-47 proved that brute strength and simple practicality could outweigh glamour and even initial skepticism. Post-war air forces took note. The lesson of the Jug wasn't simply about building big fighters, but about designing machines that matched the strategic needs of the moment. The P-47 had been mocked, then feared, and ultimately celebrated. Its story became a reminder that in the crucible of total war, what mattered most was not how a plane looked, but whether it brought its pilot home and left the enemy burning below. By the close of the war, the laughter that had once greeted the Thunderbolt had been replaced by an enduring respect. Former Luftwaffe pilots, hardened by years of combat, admitted with candor that the Jug had become one of the most feared machines in the sky. What began as jokes about its bulk ended with solemn recognition of its unmatched power and resilience. The P-47 had forced its way into their memory not through elegance, but through sheer dominance. For Allied veterans, the Jug became a beloved companion. Pilots recalled its ability to absorb punishment and still carry them home, its heavy guns tearing through targets with ruthless efficiency. Many credited their survival to the aircraft's rugged design, while bomber crews remembered the reassurance of seeing Thunderbolts weaving above their formations. Respect for the Jug was not confined to statistics. It was personal, forged in the crucible of combat. Historians later highlighted the P-47's role in grinding down the Luftwaffe, both in the air and on the ground. Its legacy lay not only in aerial victories, but in the psychological blow it delivered to German pilots who had once dismissed it. The Jug proved that industrial might, practical design, and relentless firepower could overturn even the most confident propaganda. In the decades that followed, restored Thunderbolts flying at air shows drew admiration from new generations. Audiences marveled at the aircraft that once drew scorn yet helped win the skies of Europe. For those who remembered the war, the Jug stood as a reminder that respect is earned not through appearance, but through performance. The laughter was long gone. In its place remained a legacy of fear, gratitude, and lasting honor.